Our agenda to show what we, by the time you update it, have done. Okay.
We're live.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. We just learned about high efficiency biomass. And we're going to be, for folks who are tuning in, we're going to be trying to find time next week to learn a little bit more about that industry in Vermont. So we are going to talk with our Ledge Council right now to get some quick updates on S202 and H753, two of our bills that are over in the Senate. And then we're going to talk about data centers. So Ellen, thanks for joining us on short notice. I'm Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Great. And we'll skip everybody in the room because you're here for something else, I think. Okay. Ellen, 202.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So just now, Senate Capital Resources reviewed S202 as you sent them. And Senator Watson has requested a further proposal of amendment. It affects two sections of your bill only. And I just sent it to Alex.
Okay.
So the subject of the two amendments, the first one is the landlord tenant provision in the plug-in solar bill, or in the plug-in solar portion of the bill, and the other is the addition of the electric motor date in the appliance efficiency section. So in the first instance of amendment, subsection G is being amended. So that is the section on landlord tenant. They have struck part of what you wrote. So they struck the provision that a tenant cannot install without permission. And so now the paragraph starts, a tenant shall provide at least 10 days notice to the landlord of the tenant's intent to install a plug-in solar device in compliance with subsection A. The landlord shall respond within 10 days with any reasonable restrictions on the installation of the device, including requiring the tenant to pay for any required electrical work and hiring a licensed electrician to do the work. So there they also struck the ability for the landlord to deny the installation.
And I'm sorry, can you read that again?
Sure, is it?
It's in our email.
In our email. Oh, okay. Thank you.
So the landlord shall respond within 10 days with any reasonable restrictions, including requiring the tenant to pay for any required electrical work and hiring a licensed electrician to do the work.
So the landlord can choose to pay themselves, or they can choose to insist that the tenant wants it, the tenant shall pay for the electricity.
There's two more sentences here that clarifies that. So a tenant shall not perform or hire someone to perform electrical work on the premises for the installation of the plug-in photovoltaic device without the landlord's permission. A landlord shall not be compelled to perform or pay for electrical work on the premises to allow for the installation of a plug-in photovoltaic device.
So, so the landlord shall respond within 10 days. They can require the tenant to pay for all the costs. If the landlord doesn't respond, the tenant may proceed. So that's the opposite of what we had. We had, if the landlord doesn't respond, the tenant may not proceed. Now the tenant can go ahead. So there's a tenant. This is, I'm having a hard time understanding how this is all going to work out, because the tenant, but these have to be installed by an electrician.
Right. So,
and you need the landlord's permission to.
Senator Watson was interested in perhaps in the future an electrician will not be needed.
Oh. So 3700 evolves to no longer require an electrician. statute would not have to be updated. So right now, you would de facto need the landlord's permission. But if 3,700 evolves to the point where you no longer need to hire an electrician, we wouldn't have to come back and rewrite the statute. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah, Rep. Southworth?
So based on everything we heard in testimony, I don't understand how UL 3700 could evolve to not needing an electrician.
Yeah, I have been thinking about this, and I don't know the sort of technical solution, but I suspect that the manufacturers of plug-in solar panels will recognize that the requirement that there be a separate circuit, that the safety concerns requiring a separate circuit and a unique plug-in socket will restrict their market by 95% or something huge, right? Like, so I suspect they will be highly incentivized to figure out how to solve those problems so that you can, in fact, plug it in safely. And I don't know enough about electrical engineering to know how they're going to do that. But I think the one issue of the blade staying charged when you unplug it feels, to a civilian, to a non-engineer, that feels like a pretty solvable problem. How they solve the problem of making sure there's not too much draw through the wires to be safe, not set the house on fire, I don't know. But I bet it's worth their spending money on some really smart electrical engineers to figure that out.
And okay, yes, and I'm going to call on you. I do just want to caution, this is a very quick preliminary heads up. This is what they're doing. We will have plenty of time for committee discussion when the bill actually comes back.
Next week.
But this is so no one's surprised. Bill's changing. Looks like it's coming back to us. We can all start thinking. Rep. Allen, do you have a
Wait for
quick?
committee comment. We'll
Great,
take
okay.
that to committee.
And the second instance of amendment?
Sure. So, bottom of page 1 into page 2, they're amending the appliance efficiency language that you added, and I believe you have seen this language before. And so, the commissioner shall adopt the standards for each product under CFR sections 431 and 430 and 431 as those provisions existed on January 19th, 2025, and amended in a final rule entitled Energy Conservation Program, Energy Conservation Standards for Expanded Scope Electric Motors, signed on January 8th, 2025, excluding any motor incorporated into a product to which a federal energy conservation standard applies under 430 or 431.
Okay, so remind us, you already said this. It's in Senate Natural. This is a proposed amendment from Senator Watson that has not yet been adopted by the committee.
No, that's not what I said. So
What did you say?
The committee just now reviewed this because it is on the calendar. All 5 senators have joined her in this amendment, and it passed unanimously.
Gotcha.
It will not
so-
be, so any of these further proposals of amendment will not be formally recommitted to your committee or their committee. They're going to just be on the floor on the calendar. So it was just an individual senator amendment. However, the whole committee has joined in it.
Okay, so this is going to be a proposed floor amendment
Yes.
with the whole committee signed on to it.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. All right. So if that passes on the floor with this amendment, it will come back to us.
And it will not be referred to your committee. It will just be on the calendar.
Okay. Got it.
Still need to put a straw poll on it.
Straw poll. Okay. Ellen, thank you. That was no notice. Appreciate you showing up. All right, Maria, 753.
Maria Royal with Legislative Council. So H 753 was referred to the Committee on Finance. They considered some proposed revisions, some amendments to the language you passed. They never really had even a straw poll vote, so I don't know how various members of the committee felt about the proposed amendments. There just wasn't unanimous support and agreement, so it wasn't voted. So it's still in committee. It's not on the agenda currently. So not sure exactly the status. I will tell you, just in terms of kind of things that they were thinking about, you'll remember this is the disconnection, utility disconnection bill. So the first part was a report from the Department of Public Service doing an assessment of disconnections based on the data available to it and reporting back to you with findings and recommendations. One of the proposed amendments was to kind of expand the scope of that report a little bit. In particular, to look at whether other vulnerable populations, there should be additional protections in the rule. For example, households with small children, left undefined, but children or pregnant women, and also persons who might not have access to or who have very limited access to healthcare. And that came up in the context of the physician certificate. Under current law, you can have, there's like a protection period from a disconnection. If you have a physician certificate saying there's a health hazard, don't disconnect for 30 months or, so in their discussions, there was consideration about, is there data showing that people have been harmed because they didn't have a physician certificate, and were they limited in the ability to actually get one? So try and assess that out a little bit more. So that's part of the report. That would have been part of the report. In terms of the rulemaking, two changes. One, to consider, how for the curtailment on disconnections during high heat, that's supposed to be part of the rule, right? You have that. And you also included language that said there may be a lower threshold for persons 62 or older, similar to the winter heat rule. They proposed consideration and inclusion of also, for purposes of that lower threshold, households with young children or with pregnant women, whether that should be incorporated into the rule. And then the other issue had to do with medical judgment and the duration of that protection period for health hazard. I think the way your language was written is that you said that the rule shall require the PUC to consider. So I think the issue was that the PUC was concerned that they didn't want to have to make medical judgments. So the language was broadened a little bit to say, shall the rule reflect medical judgment? Some a little more flexibility where they weren't in a position of having to make a determination about health hazards per se. So those were the topics that they discussed.
Great. And then it all ground to a quiet.
I haven't heard anything. I think it was maybe a couple of weeks ago.
I watched some of the testimony and got a sense, and I actually am impressed with the extra thought and ideas put into it. I think it's what I heard was just with all the bills that they have on their plate right now, this one didn't seem urgent. I just personally regret the lack of report, because I think that would have been a real asset for the next like disappointed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in all likelihood, fare thee well. But you never know. Okay. So let's see here. We're going to turn our attention to H 727 because that bill is on the move. And Maria, thank you so much for your side-by-side.
Yeah, Mike and I prepared that.
Maria and Mike. Maria, thank you.
Mike made sure that was right.
Thanks to everyone for the side-by-side. I've got a printout of that. There was another document that showed the amended language, and I'd love to have a copy of that, Alex. I don't know if you could run out a few of those. Who else wants?
I have one.
So, okay, I think almost everybody wants. I've already got the side-by-side.
I've got the and I have the bill.
Okay, and I could use the actual bill. So I think it would be helpful, Maria, thanks for doing this. to get the same kind of rundown. I know it's been moving through committees with votes, but I don't know where it is like as of right now.
Okay, so it started in finance, it was referred to finance. And finance was relieved of possession, shifted over to Senate Natural Resources and Energy. They took testimony. I was gonna say considerable, I don't actually, it's a relative term, I don't know what that means, but they made a number of changes, number of proposed amendments. Voted it out of committee, then it was referred back to finance because they added what's called the energy transformation payment, an annual payment. So that has to be considered by finance. Finance reviewed all the changes and voted the bill last night out of committee. It's on the notice calendar on the Senate floor today. So it should come up for second reading tomorrow.
Great. So tomorrow and Tuesday.
Third reading on
Okay.
Tuesday.
Alrighty. And then remind me then. So we've got an amended bill. It's coming to the floor, assuming it passes the Senate. Is it the same thing where we take a straw poll and it just comes to the floor, or do we? What happens? What are our
I
choices?
think it might be up to you. I think it can just, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. I never, parliamentary procedure is not my strong point, but I think if it comes back to the House and you're aware of all the changes and you just want to concur with the proposals of amendment, that motion can be made on the floor. And so it doesn't get referred to committee.
Okay.
You can just have, if you want to make further committee amendments, you can ask for it to be referred to your committee and have possession of it. You could also have individual members, if it doesn't come to your committee, individual members can offer an amendment on the floor supported by all of you or a couple of you. So I think there's some.
Or you can ask for a conference.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay. We'll have to think about all that. Okay. I need to wrap my head around all those choices. Because okay. All right. So back to our, we should ask everybody in the room to introduce themselves. We have a big crowd today. We've already introduced ourselves. So.
Michael O'Grady, legislative council.
Adam McGeary, attorney with Conservation Law Foundation.
Ben Edgerly, Walter Beaver.
Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee.
Great. Johanna Miller, Vermont Natural Resources Council.
Dana Lee Perry, New Crossing Group.
Rick Haver, PNC. John Groveman, PNRC.
Super. All righty. Maria.
so what would be the most helpful? Do you want to kind of go through a high level of kind of the substantive changes, or do you want to start by looking at your language as amended by now Senate Natural Resources, but
It's more helpful to me to walk through our language. I do want to get my hard copy first.
Yeah, it's 20 pages, so I have to send it down to the printer.
Oh,
They're gonna
okay.
bring it up.
Sounds good.
I can pull it up here. and
Yeah, that'd be great.
Start, okay.
Super.
Okay, so just overall, same structure of the bill, right? The first section has to do with the large load equity contracts, the PUC oversight of those contracts and all the requirements in the contract. Energy related issues primarily. Then you have the Act 250 trigger, and as part of the Act 250 review, some additional water regulations. So that structure and then two reports at the end. So really structure's all the same. But they did, within each of them, there's some proposed changes. So for example, in the purpose section, to Title 30, the PUC jurisdiction, they wanted to specify that the new regulatory framework should occur in a manner that financially benefits existing ratepayers and protects them from additional costs. There's an aversion to the word unwarranted, so that was changed in every instance. There's also the dislike of the word mitigation or mitigate, so that was changed, just so you know, throughout in case I don't stop. But anyway, So those are the changes in the purpose section. Definitions. Data center is the same, 20 megawatt threshold is the same. Just included a definition of electric company, and that's really just to make the drafting more concise. So that this is the retail electric company that will or does provide service. So just trying to simplify drafting. And then, yeah.
Does that exist? That definition exists elsewhere in statute?
Well, not exactly, because it's specific to the data centers, right? And typically the retail electric companies are distribution utilities, right? Telco is the wholesale transmission utility. There are other utilities, Efficiency Vermont is a utility, right? So there are different types. Pilot Authority is also kind of weird because they're sometimes referred to as electric companies, sometimes electric utilities. It's maybe one day there could be a little bit more uniformity there, but not today. Please. Okay. So the kind of big substantive change that's proposed is to the definition of facility. So everything that's not highlighted reflects your language. So facility means it's just reordered some of it. So it might look a little different, but it means all buildings, equipment, structures, other stationary items that are owned or operated by the same person or by any person that is controlled by, or is under common control of such person, and that are located on a single site or contiguous or adjacent sites. What is proposed here has to do with multiple non-adjacent sites. So if you have multiple non-adjacent sites that function as a single integrated operation by virtue of shared infrastructure or unified operational protocols, and they're under a central management system, then those sites will be considered in the aggregate for purposes of meeting that threshold of what a data center is. So
Okay.
a 5 megawatt and a 15 megawatt, if they function as kind of one
Okay.
unit, then
So if a single company comes in central management, so in other words, they cannot build a 5 megawatt, a 5 megawatt, a 5 megawatt, a 5 megawatt on like nearby parcels and be like, oh, these don't trigger.
that's the concern.
Okay.
Trying to make sure that that's contemplated.
Okay.
So then under the large load service network contract, for the purpose of ensuring just and reasonable rates for all rate care classes and precluding the risk of financial exposure to electric companies, I need to say distribution, entered into a contract approved by the PUC. And then the contract itself shall, and then it goes through all of the things that need to be included in the contract. Kind of change the language a little bit. I'm on page 3, subdivision 2. So the contract shall ensure that other ratepayer classes are insulated from all costs associated with data center deployment, including expenses for new generation, distribution, and transmission infrastructure, as well as energy capacity and resource adequacy costs. So really just another way of saying the same thing, not a real substantive change here. With respect to subdivision 3, the duration of the contract, they wanted to require that each contract shall be for a minimum of 10 years.
That is interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. You have any insight as to why they care that it be a minimum of 10 years?
Not really. I mean, I think there are built-in protections here where the data center is obligated to pay. They have all kinds of financial assurances, to be responsible for any costs that are incurred, whether they're doing business, or not. I think, I don't know, maybe the thinking was a 3-year contract would not actually work. You could never recover all the costs, but even if they're financially on the hook, we want to. So, I mean, it's unlikely to make the capital investment for less, I think, but I think they just wanted some reassurance that we're talking long-term contracts. But
Okay, Rep. Sibilia?
Yeah, a big impact, big investment. 10 years is both good for protection. Good for protection and investment for sure. I mean, who's gonna make that? Yeah, it's a big impact.
Okay,
so in six, changing mitigate to prevent the risk of stranded costs. Yeah.
Actually, sorry,
yeah,
we can just go back to 2.
Yes.
You just, I want to make sure I understand that last sentence here. I think it's just looking at it here, bolded and crossed out. Sure, other regulator, insulated from all costs associated with leaving as well as energy capacity and resource adequacy costs. Let me just explain that. So this is in the contract and ensuring that ratepayers are insulated from the costs of energy capacity and resource adequacy costs.
Yeah, so it's similar to language that you had. I think what it's getting at is new infrastructure builds as well as any of the embedded costs. So the existing infrastructure, to the extent that the new power demands it require, use existing infrastructure and increase the resources necessary to manage the grid, the operational costs, the maintenance costs, the upgrades that might be necessary, and also just add to the management of where power comes from, like so that any of those costs, not necessarily the cost of capital for building new transmission lines or substations, but the ongoing operational incremental costs.
Okay. Thank you.
So then, bottom of page 3, subdivision 7. So with demand side management, you had kind of a similar language, as you can see, related to demand side management. That should include demand response, flexible load management practices, and then you listed some of the things that might be included: load shifting, peak shaving, etc. So what is proposed here is well, first of all, whenever the grid was talked about in terms of its stability or efficiency, to specifically mention kind of the 4 metrics for looking at the grid. So stability, efficiency, reliability, and resiliency. So those terms are kind of used consistently throughout because they're all impacted one way or another. But then it strikes the kind of the examples that you had proposed, and instead says that at a minimum, the data center shall satisfy the requirements of section 285. So that's the demand side management section of law. That's where the bulk of their substantive proposals are, which we'll get to in a minute. What in your bill, it was, I think, called energy efficiency design, and it was the requirement that the data center early in the project development phase consult with Efficiency Vermont to ensure the design is compliant with efficiency standards, building standards, and best practices. So that section is now very different. They're very specific requirements that need to be met. If you look at those. And again, it's at a minimum, so they can go above and beyond any of those requirements. So then new subdivision 8, that the contract shall address load curtailment procedures and priorities during grid emergencies.
what does that mean?
Yeah, so this is getting at the load shedding issue. So if the power supply cannot meet the power demand, and if there's risks of power outages, the grid going down because of the surge in demand and inability to have the power to meet that demand. Load shedding is when particular customers or regions are disconnected from the grid. And it's just, protect the grid, right? So you could have rolling blackouts where different customers for different periods of time are disconnected. So that's load shedding and, it's considered part like load curtailment during emergencies. I'll just mention one of the proposals that, was considered in Senate Natural was to specify that data centers shall be prioritized for disconnection before residential ratepayers. So if there needs to be shutdown, data center goes first. Couple of issues came up with that. In particular, Velco said, look, we are regulated by FERC. There are regional grid considerations. We have very specific requirements that we need to meet in our load shedding. The state, by, these provisions in a contract really can't supersede what we're already required to do under federal law. Number one. So it is what it is. And also, the idea came up of, well, data centers may provide lots of services. They may provide cloud services for 911. In other words, there may be critical aspects of a data center services that you might not want to curtail. In other words, it just raised a lot of issues. And so ultimately what they landed on to not, first of all, be inconsistent with federal requirements. It's just that they address what those standards and procedures are. So there's a conversation about, could they be curtailed? For how long and what that the impact might be. So not prescriptive, but wanting it to be considered.
So, so that's curtailment. And I have recently read reports about places where multiple centers went off at the same time, which created instability in the grid. And so
Voluntarily went off?
like the data center itself, I can't remember exactly what the cause was, but they went off. Yeah, unexpectedly went off at the same time,
Okay.
which created a big drop on the grid. And so this language right here is about us saying there's too much demand or like we want you to,
Right.
but that's different. So does the contract allow the contract language, which has to be approved by the PUC? Does it allow for discussion about unexpected outages that could impact the grid?
So I'm not sure that there's specific language about that. So if the data center voluntarily, for whatever reason, without notice, just disconnects and uses their on-site
Mhm.
storage or generation. There's no specific, I don't think there's anything here that says you need to provide notice, or you need to address that.
Okay.
It's certainly grid stability issue, so
Mhm. Okay, and I'm looking for the article.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, that seems like an important point. Because grid instability can be caused by imbalances between supply and demand on either side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So you could certainly add it to like subdivision 8,
yeah,
load curtailment during grid emergencies or voluntary disconnections.
unexpected.
Yeah, the circumstances under which there might be a voluntary disconnection or, and notice or whatever.
I don't know whether you need to have all it back 10% or not, but it seems like an important thing to consider.
I don't think there will be time for volley.
No.
So let's all keep that in mind. It's probably concur or conference with the timer.
And so I will just say, you're 100% right to like raise that specific issue. There's like general provisions about grid stability where that might come up, but nothing that calls it out specifically. So
Can I just point though to, sorry, Adam Aguirre from Conservation Law Foundation on B4, there is a obligation of the data center to pay a minimum amount for percentage based on the data center's projected electricity usage. I think the intention there is to try to smooth that demand out because what you're talking about is data centers who are voluntarily shedding demand so that they aren't paying the peak price. And so this is,
That's not what I'm talking about.
okay,
I'm talking about, I'm gonna find the article.
okay.
Multiple sensors went off, like there was a glitch. So
Oh, okay,
unexpected, it was
okay.
not a choice that they made. And so how do we
Got it.
anticipate that?
Got it.
Okay, so that brings us to subsection C, and what you'll notice, you had a subsection C which required PUC approval of the contract if it finds that the contract will promote the general good of the state, and then in D, you had specific findings that need to be made before such approval. So Senate Natural combined the two provisions basically into one subsection C. So first, the commission should not approve large load contract unless the commission first finds that it will promote the general good of the state and that its terms, and then it just goes through each of those, but so not a substantive change, just a little bit more concise. And again, you'll see in that first subdivision A, including stability and resiliency, when looking at the impact on the grid generally. All of the other findings are unchanged. What is proposed to be added is that new subdivision 2 on lines 12 and 13, that the commission's findings pursuant to this subsection shall be in writing and shall include a stated rationale for each. So just wanting to make sure there was public transparency about any reasoning behind decisions that were made.
That sounds fine to me. Would that not, it seems to me that that would have happened, just be a matter of course.
I think typically in a special contract or tariff proceeding, I think generally it would include with an order or approval that would be in writing, but this
So
is just,
stating the obvious.
yeah, and I think specifically with the findings, like make sure, I mean, likely they would all be addressed in order very systematically, but so
Okay.
this is reassurance. So then a new proposal with respect to review of any approved contracts. So subsection D, starting with subdivision 1. The commission shall conduct a periodic review of the contract approved under this section. The purpose of the review shall be to verify the data center's ongoing compliance with all established contract terms, conditions, and regulatory obligations. And the review shall be performed at intervals not to exceed 2 years. However, the commission may initiate the review at any time on a finding of good cause or when deemed necessary to protect the public interest. So that is the language. Subsection E, no change there. Can't participate in savings accounts, can't be self-managed utility, no change. So then I'm on page 6. So with respect to section 285, this was your energy efficiency design provision. So this is where both of the changes were made in Senate Natural. So its title of the statute is demand side management generally. They included a purpose section, subsection A. Purpose of this section is to minimize any adverse impact of a data center operations on Vermont's electric system, other ratepayers, and the environment. It aims to minimize peak demand increases, reduce associated costs, and enhance the grid stability, efficiency, reliability, and resiliency while minimizing climate pollution emissions and maximizing benefits to Vermonters. Overall statement of purpose for this section. So in terms of specific requirements, a new requirement for a site suitability analysis, and that's in subdivision B1. Line 14, so prior to submitting a permit, an Act 250 permit, the owner or operator of a proposed data center shall conduct a site suitability analysis, which shall be developed in consultation with the electric company and Efficiency Vermont. The analysis shall provide a preliminary assessment of the facility's capacity to comply with commercial building energy standards required under Vermont law, maximize the deployment of on-site renewable energy generation, battery storage, and demand response assets, and implement a waste heat recovery system capable of providing thermal energy to adjacent municipal or residential buildings.
Could you scroll back up just half a page or whatever to get the start of this?
Sure. So these are,
Okay, so this is like, I'm sorry, just a few more lines.
oh, sorry.
All right. So this is we're in assessing the site for its suitability and design. We are in pre mode here. Okay. So this is a new step that needs to be ready to roll when you apply for your Act 250 permit. This information needs to be ready to submit.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure I was okay.
Yep. And in part,
And this is what I'm sorry.
yeah,
And this is what the data center operator has to have ready.
yes,
Okay.
yes. And working with the electric company and Efficiency Vermont, like try to assess the capacity to
Got
do all of these things. So really just the beginning of the design, make sure they're thinking about ways to maximize on-site renewables, make sure they comply with efficiency requirements. Is there a possibility of waste heat recovery?
For thermal.
Right. So,
Okay.
and then project design requirement similar, and this kind of reflects the language that you had passed. So it says in the design and construction of a data center, the owner or operator shall ensure compliance with state energy efficiency requirements and best practices, very similar to your language, and maximize the potential of the site and any structures on the site to host renewable energy. So rooftop solar as well as freestanding generation facilities. So again, project design, make sure they're thinking about these things when developing.
I saw your eyebrows doing something.
This back to the site suitability. I'm just wondering like where energy efficiency plays in terms of the site, not so. Is it the orientation?
I think it's meant to include the facility on the site.
Oh,
I think so, yeah.
because of the next
Yeah,
that goes into project design,
no, you're right.
which is a little.
You're right. I think, yeah. Yeah, maybe that needs to be clarified. I actually hadn't even occurred to me, but yeah. So not just the physical land, the
Right.
structure and any of them. So, yeah,
Yeah, but
Site
that's for
facility.
flooding or something.
facilities.
Yeah.
Yep. So section C is concerns combustion-based backup generation. You'll remember in this committee, there have been concerns raised about, a particular diesel backup generation. And they, it's a natural one to take a proactive position, make sure that they're not used as a matter of course in the business and they're limited, as follows in subdivision C1. So a data center shall use combustion-based backup generation only during emergency situations involving power failures and interruptions. Otherwise, the data center shall prioritize to the greatest extent practicable the use of battery storage and on-site renewable energy generation. So as part of their ongoing operations and load management, they shouldn't be switching to diesel unless it's an emergency.
Just reminding myself, so the contract is a 10-year contract
A minimum.
at a minimum. So in the unlikely case, we have a bad actor in here who's acting erratically or without appropriate notice. What guardrails do we have on that? Does the PUC have any?
The
power in that?
PUC reviews contracts for compliance, right? At any
If someone's out
time.
of compliance.
So, yep, and they have authority, their general Title 30 enforcement authority penalties for violations of Title 30. I believe that would apply. PC could confirm. how they apply that to special contracts now, or whether there should be more specific demands, penalties here.
I see Mr. Paper, we'll hear from him later.
Uh-huh.
But yeah,
Yep.
just understanding what
Sure.
repeat,
Yeah.
how we might handle.
Yeah.
if we have a repeat.
And so there is a definition of combustion-based backup generation includes any electrical generation system that emits air contaminants as defined in Vermont law. And this was getting at not just fossil fuel, diesel generation, but like biodiesel also emits air contaminants, and wanting to ensure that those were not relied on either routinely. So page 8, subsection D concerning distributed renewable generation, which specifies taking into consideration the site suitability analysis and project design requirements under subsection B and any other relevant factors. The data center shall maximize the construction and operation of on-site renewable energy generation to the greatest extent technically feasible. That doesn't include any plant that emits air contaminants. So the fuel combustion generators, they would not qualify as on-site. And a data center shall transfer any renewable energy certificates or environmental attributes generated from the operation of plants constructed under this subsection to the electric company.
Okay, so they're not,
Benefiting.
trading or selling their own RECs. They would go to the electric company.
For the
Okay,
benefit of ratepayers.
for the benefit of ratepayers. Got it. Okay,
So then subsection E, this is the annual payment for the energy transformation payment. And so subdivision 1, because of the unique and significant demands a data center has on Vermont's electric system, it shall contribute proportionally to state initiatives that reduce fossil fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. Accordingly, a data center shall make an annual payment directly into a fund managed by the electric company. And the payment shall be used to finance energy transformation projects as defined in Vermont law, as defined under the renewable energy standards of the tier 3 projects to the extent practicable, such projects shall be developed in the community hosting the data center and the surrounding communities.
so money will go into a pot managed by the electric company to use in meeting their tier 3 obligations, which is our in-state renewables. And if you can build it in that community, so much the better.
Right, and I think under the res tier 3, their utilities are supposed to lower their customers'
Oh, right.
reliance
Okay.
on fossil fuel by 12% of the percentage. But in terms of the alternative compliance payment contributed to energy transformation, it could include not just more efficient systems, but I think weatherization, any number of things that reduce fossil fuel consumption generally. It's my understanding.
Okay. So to the direct benefit of their customers. Okay.
And there is, okay, so sorry, it's getting ahead of myself. So page 9, subdivision 2, in terms of the amount of the payment, it shall be equal to 60% of the data center's electricity usage for the prior calendar year, multiplied by the alternative compliance payment rate established under Vermont law. Payment shall be made in advance at the start of each calendar year based on projected electricity usage, and any difference between projected and actual usage shall be reconciled in the following year's payment. So the current rate that's cited, cross-referenced here, the base rate in statute is 6%, but the PUC can adjust it for inflation. I think now it's a little over, did I say 6%? I meant to say 6 cents. It's a little over 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So a facility, a 20 megawatt facility operating if it operated, I probably wouldn't operate at full capacity 24/7. But if it did, it would be something like $7.4 million a year. Less than that if it was operating at 80% capacity, 6 million, something in that neighborhood.
So you said 6 cents per kilowatt hour.
Right now it's like a little over 7 cents
Adjusted by
Adjusted,
UC.
yeah. Per kilowatt hour.
So 60% of the data centers usage prior year for this.
Yeah.
For terminating it. So if they
Yeah.
used, I don't know what, 100,000.
Oh, well then, yeah,
I
multiply.
don't know,
Yeah,
whatever, times 6
Yeah.
cents.
yeah, they're kilowatt hours, yeah. So then subdivision 3 says that in the event that funds generated under this subsection are used to support projects that are also supported by the electric company under their tier 3 requirements or by any other regulated entity, the commission shall prorate the reduction in fossil fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions credited to the regulated entity. It can't be double counted, basically. Same project, intermingling of funds, the electric company can't claim funds that come from that data center. And then finally, some subsection F concerns virtual power plants, and it specifies that a data center shall participate in a virtual power plant managed by the electric company if one is available and it's technically feasible. Otherwise, it shall design and implement a self-managed virtual power plant in coordination with the electric company to optimize energy generation and consumption. So there is a definition. I'm just going to skip down for a second of what a virtual power plant is in subdivision 2. It means a network of distributed energy resources such as batteries, demand response assets, renewable energy generation, and controllable loads that are coordinated through software to function like a traditional power plant. So this is the kind of microgrid. It function as its own microgrid, meeting its own demand and potentially also selling excess demand back onto the grid. But basically, there's that operational control of its own power usage. Yeah.
Would the data center be allowed to, if it had come up with an efficiency program, would they be allowed to participate in that? In the funds that they're paying into? We're saying they're making an efficiency payment, is that correct?
Oh, they're making energy transformation payment. So energy transformation projects. So would they be allowed to use that money to pay for their own efficiency assets?
Yeah.
I don't think so. And let's just read what I kind of skipped over the end of that first subdivision. So line 20, it says data center funds used to develop or implement a virtual power plant under this subsection shall be in addition to any support or incentives provided under subsection E, which is the energy transformation payment. So no, they can't use any of those funds. Also, in addition to any ratepayer funded or state funded programs supporting the deployment or operation of assets participating in such virtual power plants. So yeah, no public funds, and the transformation payments are separate. Well, you go to, other customers, not the data center. Right. Yeah.
Just make sure I understand Representative Bailey's question. So you're asking if those transformation payments can be accessed by the data center to reduce its own fossil fuel? Because the transformation is to reduce fossil fuel usage by the utilities. So these data centers, should be pretty electrified, I think.
Okay, to maybe offset the payment or something.
So we're trying to make sure, sorry, I want to make sure I understand that too. We're trying to make sure that the data center isn't paying into a fund that it is then drawing out of. That the funds are used to help ratepayers.
Yeah, I'm
Is
not
that
sure
the
what they would use it for.
Purpose here?
Yeah.
But I'm just checking. Is that the,
That's my understanding of
okay,
this language, but others have additional
I mean, I
information on
would
it.
think, I mean, the data center is an electric customer like any other customer. They're paying into this fund that's available to the electric company's customers to reduce their fossil fuel use. So I would think the data center could apply and say, hey, you know, we've got a fleet of vehicles and we'd like to, over gas vehicles, we'd like to replace them with electric vehicles. Can you send us some money? Sure. Is that not plausible?
Well, then they're also paying the efficiency charge,
They
correct?
are paying the efficiency charge, yeah.
So if they came up, they said, oh, we got super duper new lighting thing that we want to, would they still be able to qualify for efficiency?
Kind of a
Well, that's where.
offset or
that-
discount,
that's where
they,
it's
I think,
Vermont.
yeah,
So
they are required to make that payment. They can't participate in other programs. The efficiency programs, energy savings account and that. But your question about like, we have a fleet of, I don't know that that's specifically contemplated. But it does seem like, you know, if it makes sense as a resource management, that, you know, they pay for their shares, I think they use an electric company shares in the cost for the benefit of ratepayers, that probably economically makes sense to, but yeah, that's kind of figured that kind of sharing of resources, that might benefit ratepayers. Like, if it benefits ratepayers, it's more economically feasible.
let's keep going.
So then, the quarterly and annual report, so the data center quarterly reports, there's just a explicit specification that these reports are subject to public inspection and copying under the Public Records Act.
Would they not already
I
be?
think they would be
Okay.
already, yep. But just make it very clear,
Okay.
the desire and intent for transparency of this information. The department's annual report, essentially the same. There was just a request, and the committee agreed to narrow the focus a little bit to regional developments. In terms of any significant developments within the region, such as significant laws or regulations with respect to data centers enacted or adopted in other states in the region, any known data center construction in the region, and any known impact on ratepayers from such construction in that state or region. So trying to narrow it a little bit more. The rules, just striking what was extraneous information in addition to rules required by the subchapter, because there are no other rule requirements in the version that was ultimately passed by the House. The application section is substantively the same, it's just moved to the end, section 6. So then we get into the land use, section 2, it's the Act 250 trigger. Page 12, you'll see that they specify that any data center development, the trigger, Act 250 trigger would apply even if the data center was located on land within a tier 1A area, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in section 6034 of this title. So this is the kind of downtown, more industrial areas where the municipality can petition to have municipal zoning apply. That's not permitted here. You still have to go through the state Act 250 review.
Okay.
And that gets us to the water use, which I happily skip over. I will just very quickly go over the 2 remaining sections regarding the renewable energy report. They just specified, make sure it gets to the committee on environment as well. That's all that was.
And then under the decommissioning plan, the recommendation that the department's gonna bring back to you is just making sure that if there's, to the extent that there's there needs to be approval of any decommissioning plan by the appropriate regulatory entity, but ensuring that there is a very clear delineation of authority if more than one entity is involved in the approval process. Make sure there's no confusion there in terms of land use, energy, whatever, IT. And then in terms of the data sanitization, that is kind of removing all the data, making it not recoverable. They wanted to cite some specific standards. And so what's here, the storage device sanitization and destruction manual policy. This is something that's used by the US government, Department of Defense, and it's for destroying infrastructure, documents, having classified materials. So it's the most stringent requirements for making sure no data is recoverable or in any way accessible. And that is it for me. So you'll see the application at the end. So that means it applies to the, all the Act 250 stuff applies to any data centers that are not operational, and then just changing the language a little bit. Instead of saying as well as to any smaller traditional data centers, the existing data centers, it just says to the data centers that use less than 20 megawatts of power that are operational on the effective date. And same requirement you have, that to the extent they expand, then they would trigger you.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow, Maria, thank you.
I'm gonna leave this up.
I just, that would.
Sure.
Great. Good morning, this is Micah Grave, Budget Council. You are looking at section 3, which is the section on water use and permitting. Just like Maria, I'll note what has changed and what hasn't changed, and for what has changed, I'll reference why. So in the definitions, and BSA 6086A, which is that section being added to Act 250 for District Commission review of data centers and their water use. The definition of closed loop cooling system does not change. Definition of data center has not changed. Definition of PFAS, which is the EPA definition, which is the 1500 universe as opposed to the 15,000 universe, that has not changed. The requirement that the data center identified to the commission, how the data center will cool the facility will not change. The requirement that the data center use a closed loop system has not changed. What has changed is you had authorized the commission to approve an alternative system if the closed loop system is not feasible, provided that the alternative minimizes impacts. So the Senate changed that a little bit. So it's a closed loop cooling system or an alternative cooling system that is approved by the commission and that shall not use more water than a comparable closed loop cooling system for the data center. And then with regard to the minimization, et cetera, they added language at the bottom of page 13. Before approving an alternative cooling system, the commission shall find that the alternative cooling system will minimize groundwater use or surface water use and will not unreasonably burden a public water supply, surface water, or groundwater resource. So if there's going to be an alternative, it has to have the comparable water usage as a closed loop system. It has to have a minimized use of groundwater, surface water, and it can't burden the public water supply, surface water, or groundwater resource.
Rep Southworth?
How is unreasonably burdened a water supply defined? How is that determined?
It's not defined, but this is the kind of findings that the district commission makes pretty regularly in Act 250. They'll go through a test, and if there is an issue with it, they do have the ability, the LURP does have the ability to define what that means for purposes of this in rules. So,
Thank you.
on page 14,
subdivision 3, if it's going to, if water is used through a closed loop or an alternative, and alternative is being in there, the data center has to identify, where the data center will identify water. That basically has not changed, and where the cooling water will be discharged, that basically has not changed. And if the data center proposes to use groundwater, it's still going to be subject to the groundwater withdrawal permit. We just changed some of the citations in that subdivision. Similarly, if it was going to use surface water, page 14, line 16, sub D, it has to get a surface water withdrawal permit. Remember, they're not going to be available until 2027. So any data center that wants to use surface water isn't going to be able to operate until 2027. The only thing changing there is the citation references. The requirement that the data center get all applicable water quality permits is largely not changed. There, you will see that shorelands is struck. The shoreland permit underneath that chapter says if you need an Act 250 permit, you don't need a shoreland permit, because shorelands are already part of an Act 250 permit review. So it would have been duplicative to have to get the shoreland permit and the Act 250 permit. So shorelands was struck by the Senate because that's already contemplated in the Act 250 review. Should I move on? So in your bill, this is a pretty substantive change. You had required the data center to obtain from A&R a water quality certificate that met the same criteria as the Federal Clean Water Act requirements under Section 401 of the Federal Clean Water Act. A&R didn't like that. They were engaged in discussions with the advocates and the committee about how to achieve the purpose of that language as you had drafted it, while not triggering or referencing a 401 certificate and what that may all entail. So instead of referencing the 401, they first developed a trigger. So if the data center proposes to use more than 150,000 gallons a day of surface water, and so that's when the type of assessment that was contemplated under the 401 will be triggered, when 150,000 gallons a day of surface water. So how did they come up with 150,000 gallons a day of surface water? Well, an open loop system on average uses 300,000 gallons a day, an open loop. We couldn't find what the average closed loop system uses, but there's multiple calculations or conclusions that a closed loop system saves up to 70% or reduces up to 70% of the water usage of an open loop. So to have some margin of error, they said, well, 50% of what the daily for an open loop system will be the trigger for a closed loop system. So if that closed loop system is using 150,000 gallons a day, or it's the alternative, remember, they can get an alternative system approved. The agency, in reviewing the application for a surface water withdrawal, has to assess the impacts on water quality, aquatic biota, endangered and threatened species, and stream flow habitat, impingement, stream bank erosion, littoral habitat, and wetlands. So those were the key assessments that's part of a 401. And so instead of referencing a 401, you reference the specific things that you want to review, and then you create a trigger, because if it's not using 150,000 gallons a day of surface water, do you want to make the agency do all these assessments? And so the determination was no, there's going to be a trigger. You're going to reference the specific assessments you want instead of referencing a 401 for every data center.
What's impingement?
It's basically reduction in flow, reduction in how the water moves.
Since we're doing definitions, what is littoral habitat?
It's kind of like lakeside, rivers for the riparian, and that kind of, like, the twirl is the riparian
Shoreline.
right?
Shoreline.
Yeah. Um. So the issuance of a surface water withdrawal permit by the agency after completion of the assessments creates a rebuttable presumption that you meet criterion 1 in Act 215. But only for water. Remember, criterion 1 is air and water. This doesn't get you a rebuttable presumption that you comply with the air requirements. This gets you a rebuttable presumption that you comply with the water requirements. And if you complete all of these assessments and are approved, it's a pretty good standard for concluding that you met criterion like the water. On page 16, the agency may by rule, and this is A&R, may by rule reduce the amount of water withdrawal that will trigger the assessments underneath this section. So if they determine that 150,000 is too high for a closed loop system, they can by rule reduce the amount that triggers those assessments. And then on page 16, this is sub F on 5. This was probably one of the bigger issues in the Senate regarding water quality, about how to measure for and monitor PFAS. Remember, you had a requirement that the data center submit a monitoring plan to A&R, and then A&R has to approve that, and then you had a ban on a discharge of PFAS. And there was advocates that were saying, well, that effectively basically prohibits the data center because you would be able to meet that standard because there's PFAS in the water. So there's going to be PFAS being discharged. So what they did is that.
Sorry, Mike, I know I can look up the testimony myself. Those advocates were from the manufacturing industry?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure
Yes.
we knew what advocates.
So they struck your requirement to have a monitoring plan and instead require that first, that the data center is going to monitor for the maximum amount of PFAS that are detectable under US EPA standard methods approved as of January 1, 2026. So those two methods that are currently available that for monitoring, they are going to have to monitor for all of those that are detectable under those two methods. One is fairly discrete, about 45 to 50. One is very large. It's about all fluorinated compounds. They're going to have to figure out how they're going to meet those two standards in monitoring for PFAS at the facility.
Before you go on, a question there. Has those standards changed at all since January 1, 2025?
So the Senate has a couple of members who are very concerned that the current standards are going to change and change not for the better. And so they're trying to freeze in what methods or tools or standards are going to be used.
Right.
And that's why that's in there. If there is going to be a different method that comes out or additional monitoring that would be available, you would probably have to go back into this and change that D.
Well, my question was though, whether you're aware that the federal standards have changed. I mean, January 1, 2025 and January 1, 2026, or have they not changed?
I looked at it about a month ago and I don't believe it has changed.
Okay, so fixing it at the date is in here.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
And then if there's a water quality standard for PFAS, which there currently is not, there might be in the near future, but only for 2 to 10 PFAS. If there is a water quality standard, the data center shall not discharge waste that exceeds that criteria. But if there have been no criteria that have been established under the water quality standards, and the data center is withdrawing surface water or groundwater for purposes of operating the cooling system, They shall monitor the withdrawn water at the point of discharge for PFAS. So they're going to figure out what the base load of PFAS is went from the withdrawn water, surface or groundwater. And when they discharge that water, which they will have to do, even in a closed loop system, you need to discharge some of it. And that's actually authorized under your definition of closed loop. PFAS in the discharge waste shall not exceed the level of PFAS detected in the surface water or groundwater at its point of withdrawal. So you are effectively banning the addition of PFAS into the cooling water that's used, but you are not prohibiting any PFAS in the water because could be PFAS in the surface water or groundwater that is withdrawn for the purposes of cooling. So the advocate's concern with the language that was passed out of the House that it would prohibit any data center because no data center could not discharge PFAS or potentially not discharge PFAS in the cooling water. That has been addressed. And then because there is this potential PFAS standard out there for the water quality criteria, and because you required A&R in 2017 to actually adopt surface water quality standard for PFAS, which they haven't done, and I'm not criticizing them for it because it's very difficult, and you probably want to tie it to a federal standard. The new 2 to 10 PFAS chemical standard is a US EPA standard. They just approved that, and it says PFAS standard for aquatic life affected by a surface water discharge. ANR is probably going to be required by EPA to adopt that in the next 2 to 3 years. And so, but on or before January 1, 2027, they will submit to you, the General Assembly, a recommended standard for authorizing PFAS in the discharge of waste from the cooling systems of data centers to surface waters of the state. So they will have the ability to say, hey, let's use the EPA standard that was just proposed, or let's use something else. Maybe there have been efforts regionally to find a standard for surface water discharge for PFAS, and maybe that happens in the next year or so. But you'll get a recommendation from them of what that standard should be. And those are the water sections.
Thank you.
Do you mind if
No,
because I have to go draft amendments for
not at all.
more.
We have good witnesses. Are you okay to?
I know how to use the board.
Okay, great. Alrighty, we've got folks who've been waiting a while, so, Mr. Tabor. Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you. Have a good day.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Greg Tabor with the PUC. We're talking about 8727 today. I guess I'll just go through, unless you have a different idea, I guess I'll just go through the parts that implicate PUC. Yeah, I guess that's the best way to do it. So starting at page 2, line 18.
Sorry, I'm sorry, we do have a question.
So
Okay.
can we just start with a reminder about the UC's disposition as this bill left to the House?
As it left the House.
Yes.
I thought there were numerous problems with it. Things needed to be moved over to different titles. It just got worse in the Senate. We did not testify in the Senate, however. So here I am back here. And I can go through those problems, and they're the same. They existed before it left here, but they've been added to. So I'll go through and point them out for what it's worth. But like I said, we didn't even testify in the Senate. Did that for what it is. So beginning on line 18 of page 2, this starts with this large load service equity contract approval. Now, I just want to point out for the record,
we already have sufficient authority to approve large load service contracts. We do that. Think about, for example, ski resorts. We have contracts between utilities and ski resorts. Ski resorts use a lot of power. So we already do that. So just for the record, we don't need additional authority to do these contracts.
I think this language originally was proposed by the department. I don't recall correctly.
I don't know, but my testimony remains the same. So if you go on to page 3, starting with B here, and it says the contract shall have a number of different provisions. So the first one is it mentions the embedded costs and the stability, efficiency, reliability, and resiliency of the electric network. Then if you go to page 4, beginning on line 16, it also has a slightly different standard for ensuring the stability, efficiency, reliability, and resiliency of the network. It's really confusing to have two very similar standards that are slightly different.
Line 16 is struck.
Looking at
So do you mean 18? We're on version with Senate proposals of amendment.
I have 1.6, so
Yeah.
I guess I'm a
I
little
think we have an
behind.
extra copy.
Does anybody have
Oh,
a copy?
okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so can you do that again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. Let me just find it.
It's half page 3, half page 4, maybe.
Right, thank you. So B1, starting on line 19 on page 2, continuing on page 3. And then you go to, oh yeah, that's starting at line 18. Very similar language, but a slightly different standard. So that's confusing. Difficult to implement.
So let's see, B1, you're saying that.
Right, B1, and then you look at C1A. And there's a similar problem with B2 and C1E. Very similar, but slightly different. Not sure why there is a C, frankly. This is all one big long list, it seems like, of things that need to be included in the contract. Why is there a demarcation at C? I just don't know. Why are we doing that? But that's more. I don't even know why it's like that. But so that's it's a little confusing, difficult to implement. And let's see. The next thing is oh yeah.
C generally
Mhm.
is the problem that you're highlighting.
Yeah, why is C there? There's a couple of different things in C, but in general, most of it's redundant with E. So some you might want to look at. Let me get to page 5. Oh, this is the fun thing about findings. So findings is short for findings of fact. There is no rationale for a fact because it's a fact. You have a rationale for a conclusion. Maybe that's what this is getting at.
Sorry, where are we now?
We're looking
Page
at
5.
page 5, 2, beginning on line 12. Says the commission's findings pursuant to this subsection shall be in writing and shall include a stated rationale. So findings are always in writing. Findings are facts. You don't have rationale for facts because it's fact. So I'm not sure what this.
So
what
the
this does.
conclusion is what you're.
Yeah, maybe you mean conclusions, and of course they're in writing, and of course it is rationale. I mean, that's what we do. So, all right. Moving on. Bear with me, do the two. So when you get to page 6, starting at line 5, the demand side management. Now, here you're talking about the siting, the actual siting of the plant, because you're talking about site suitability analysis. This should not be in Title 30 at all. This is Title 10. This is for Act 250 to do. Why it's here in Title 30, I don't know. So that part needs to be moved to the correct title. Because this is going to be very confusing for someone if they're applying under Act 250, but then they have to go back and look at the PUC standards under Title 30. It doesn't make any sense. And it also implicates, it also sort of suggests that we're in charge of the siting, and we're not. We're just doing the contract. So anything to do with siting should be put in the siting statute, which is Act 250, and that's Title 10. Then on page 7, starting at line 14, this requires data centers to use, combustion-based backup only in emergency situations. Otherwise, they have to prioritize to the greatest extent practicable the use of battery storage and on-site renewable generation. Who gets to sue on this? And who resolves this question if it arises?
I'm sorry, this is page 7, line 14.
Beginning at line 14. So if a data center doesn't prioritize the greatest extent practicable the use of battery storage and on-site renewables, who gets to sue them? Who has standing? Who resolves that dispute? Thinking it's not us, but I'm not sure. It's just not clear. So that needs to be clarified. We just don't know who does that. Oh, and then you get to page 9. Was it 9? Yeah, beginning on line 15 with the virtual power plant. This needs to be a lot more specific. You could address this potentially. If I was a giant data center, I could put 2 5-kilowatt PV panels on the roof and slap some software on it, and I qualify. Is that really what you want? I don't think it is. So you need to tighten that up.
So can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
So this is all, as you know, this is all language that the Senate added,
Oh, I
not
know,
that we
I know.
added. So the PUC, if I recall, has to sign off on the contract.
Yes. Yeah, we approve the.
And so presumably you would not sign off on a contract that was not specific here.
It's not clear. This virtual power plant really isn't part of the contract. It's part of the siting.
Okay.
But again, it's unclear, difficult to implement when it's not clear. And then you get to.
I thought we were still in the contract part of the bill.
We're going back and forth. It's really odd. No, the contract stuff ended pages ago.
I don't think so.
I mean,
It's incorporated by reference.
some of
But
it is.
these requirements in section 285 need to be reflected in the contract.
Yeah, it's not clear to us, and we believe some of it should be in Title 10.
Maria?
I don't know, I think it's certainly right for discussion. I think I can just say part of the thinking was because it relates to energy usage. That it's well within the PUC's jurisdiction. So not citing in terms of environmental land use issues, but how you develop a project that's consistent with energy goals.
We don't see it that way at all. But anyway, difference of opinion. So moving on, we got the quarterly and
Well,
annual.
We need help here.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, I mean, respectfully, I mean, we haven't asked you there to just take up space. Like, we respect your opinion and, you know, care about what you have to say. So just helping us understand
Mhm.
your perspective, even if we don't agree with it,
Right,
I would appreciate.
right. I think some of this stuff is specifically citing and should be in Title 10.
Okay.
Not all of it. We're going back and forth, like I said. Some of it, I agree with Maria, it should be under Title 30, but some of the stuff, specifically the site suitability analysis, that definitely something that should be done by Act 250 when they're citing the plans. I mean, that's when you're going to look at it. We're not going to be. Why?
Well, I mean, one way in which it affects the power grid is it near transmission lines or lines with sufficient capacity to run a data center, right?
Right. And any upgrades to those transmission facilities would come through us, totally separate.
Right. But if it involves building 20 miles of whatever of lines, that's the best place for a data center.
Right. And that would be something that Act 250 could look at. Just as they do for any other building construction.
How does that work?
As
When
well.
we have, so if we were to have a big facility, a big manufacturing facility that needed a lot of transmission built, how would that interplay work between Act 250 and the PUC in
Let's-
terms of the transmission and
Sure.
electric?
Basically, the utility would be building, let's say, a new substation and build a new substation for a specific plant, some sort of manufacturing plant. They would come to us for approval of building that substation. That's it.
And so you have no option but to approve it?
Oh, no, of course we could reject it. They would come to us for approval of it, but then we would have to go through the approval process.
Or would you consider like where the manufacturing facility is cited as part of your approval process?
Not really. Oh,
No.
we're only looking at the substation in that case. Of course, they have to provide information about the demand for the project and the economic benefits. As do all projects, but
Thank you.
so there is a demarcation. That's all I'm saying. And this sort of mixes and matches, but I think it could be clearer if some of this stuff deserves to be under Title 10.
But in terms of assessing the efficient use of resources on the power grid and where a substation should be located or a transmission line should be built.
Right.
That seems like that is part of system planning, consistent system.
That would all be under the 248 criteria that currently
Right.
exist.
But it's an important aspect of where we cite these major potential loads.
Oh, of course,
Right.
of course, yeah.
So that's the relevance to the PUC. It seems to me in terms of the site.
I guess I'm not getting that. I don't understand about the site suitability analysis. That would be something that
Perhaps it should be reworded somehow. But the point to me is where is a load that might be a large fraction of Vermont's annual load? Where's the appropriate place to put that? Seems like a good question for the PUC to be considering. For the system planning people to be considering.
it may be, but I think it could go through active jets as well. I don't see why they couldn't look at that as well. You look at the distance.
Expertise for that. That's really.
I mean, we get solar applications all the time. And sometimes they have to extend transmission to those plants. And we would approve if it qualifies, we would approve those extensions.
Right.
As part of it.
I guess I see this as really a matter of scale, where it's very large potential.
But if I'm coming in and seeking a permit for retrofitting a large warehouse, put in a data center, I'm not going to the PUC. I'm going to Act 250.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things at play here. One is the suitability of the site from the point of view of Act 250 kind of criteria. But there is there is a dimension here that has to do with what is the most efficient use of our power system.
Well, that's a whole different question, and that's not site specific. That's a different. You'd have to look at the total state usage. You're talking about completely different. I'm talking about specific siting of a data center here. I think it's a different question. I agree that that's important.
Right. Okay. Well, anyway, we should move on. But
Tori, and then we will move on.
So if that suitability step happens through Act 250, it needs to happen before the contract. Like
Exactly.
you're
So
trying
you're not
to
going to come for a
clarify,
contract.
why would you wouldn't go that far
Right,
if
exactly.
you fail on this thing.
You can't even get your building. Why are you going to
Yeah.
get a contract?
So maybe there is a way to. If you have suggestions for,
We could certainly think about it. I don't have on the top of my head, but
yeah,
there's a lot here, fortunately. And like I said, we didn't get a chance to testify downstairs, so we would have brought these up there and maybe would have been more clarity. So honestly, this is kind of the last thing here. The quarterly and annual reports.
okay,
Oh, I'm sorry. We're on page 10, starting at line 9. So it has us designing a report to collect data on the water and energy usage. Now, the energy usage, that makes sense, but the water usage sounds like something for A&R. This is pretty detailed water usage stuff as in the next section. So I would think that A&R would want to design that form to get the data they need to determine things about PFAS and other things. Not us. We don't know that stuff. Energy, yes. Water, no. So, yeah, I guess that's about it. But as it stands now, very difficult to implement. I guess that's my overall.
Greg, do you have written testimony?
No.
Okay, so just to see from me again, if written testimony is really helpful, if you want us to be able to look back on this conversation, refer to it in a conference committee, get a bit deeper understanding of your rationale and your thoughts, it's always helpful.
Right.
So,
I do have one last
Brooke
question.
Klettner?
When there's a contract, an approved contract, you've approved the contract between a data center and a power supplier, and the data center goes out of compliance. How do you find out about that?
How would we find out? The utility would cut off the power to the data center. It would be a disconnection. I mean, did I even cover that thing about the 2-year reviews? Oh, I guess I forgot. So that's another problem. So you got this 10-year contract, right? Minimum of 10 years. And then it requires us somewhere. Where is it? Well, I missed it. Goodness.
Page 5.
Page 5. Thank you. Oh, yeah. So the commission, this is page 5. Page 5, beginning in line 14. It has us conducting periodic reviews. Again, this is a contract. What will we do during a review? It's a 10-year contract. We can't abridge the contract. We would get sued. Why are we doing reviews? If the data center stops paying or is out of compliance, the utility will cut off the power. It's breach of contract. I'm not sure what purpose this serves. So
Who would know if the data center is out of compliance?
well, once they cut off the power, I think we would find out. Yeah. I mean,
Why would they cut off the power?
if they're not paying or they're not behaving in compliance with the terms and conditions of the contract, yeah, the utility would disconnect them.
So I guess I feel like we're talking in circles. Who knows? Who's responsible for knowing if the data center is out of compliance? Green Mountain Power, the PUC,
Green
with
Mountain
any aspect of the contract.
It would be Green Mountain Power would report that to us. Most likely, we wouldn't know until someone reports it. I mean, yeah, I don't see how else we would know.
Yeah, I'm sure they goes for Green Mountain Power. You have these contracts with large customers. You know, how do you ensure they are staying compliant? I mean, non-payment of bills is really easy, but
Right,
all
but
this
there's a
other-
lot of
all
other
this
stuff in the contract.
contract that may require
Right.
a site visit on the part of the utility to ensure that the customer is remaining in compliance. And I don't know if they do that or not.
Okay, Maria, did you have any comments?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I can talk to Greg, kind of wishing I didn't call it site suitability. But, yeah, I mean, it really is around energy usage and demands on the power management of the grid. I think that's why it was related to PVC. So, but I'm not saying it was, some of the issues Greg's brought up shouldn't be considered in the different.
Okay, great, Greg, thank you so much.
Sure.
Who is next? Anybody? People have been waiting very patiently a long time.
I am next on the list, Madam Chair, but if you want to.
Great,
If you want
no,
to just keep going forward, I can.
GMP with,
Okay.
We were together.
great.
Yeah. We got it, I can go together. I'll be brief and you want to address the PFAS.
Oh, you're doing your
Well choice.
bill introduction.
Or I can come back after, like.
If you wanted to
I'm
continue
sorry,
it,
these guys have been waiting since 10 seconds.
we're
sorry.
here all the time, so.
Well-
Madam Chair, we can come back if you want to keep on the energy.
Yeah.
Discussion. I mean, we can-
Well, Rep Care Duncan is supposed to completely stop what we're doing and do a bill introduction on a totally different topic. So if it's okay,
That's fine.
Emily, I'm really sorry. We will reschedule you, our fault. But I don't want to stop what we're doing here.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Forgot you were on the agenda.
Well, we can probably get you through the water section in 10 or 15 minutes and it sounds like you're going to need to spend more time talking about energy than you're going to be talking about the water section.
Yeah.
So.
How about, let's go.
Okay.
Thanks. GMP was invited. Did we hear back from GMP?
Yeah, she can come Wednesday, but since the floor times changed,
Okay, so we'll try to get them scheduled. The Department of Public Service has submitted, resubmitted their written testimony from the Senate side. They're not going to be coming in to testify. And we are here then with Jared and John. Okay, for the record.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm member of the committee, Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee.
John Groveman, Vermont Natural Resources Council.
I will talk generally about the water sections and then John will address the PFAS sections. When Mr. O'Grady was going through, I'm working off 1.6, but I think I accurately reflected the new pages and line numbers. And so I'll be starting on, well, the water section starts on page 12, line 11. It proceeds from there. Generally, Madam Chair, this committee did some great work to build the section that addresses concerns on water quality and water quantity impacts. As Mike walked you through, the Senate changed them a little bit. We are in favor of the changes the Senate made and would ask just generally that you concur with the Senate's changes to the water quality section.
To the non-PFAS.
Except for the PFAS, John has some concerns with PFAS. So I don't know if you want me to go through the other portions of it or just let John address the PFAS section since we're in favor. I can go
go through and tell you why?
Yeah, just give us some
Yes.
highlights.
Great. So one was on page 13, line 13, which is section B2. This is the section that initially it left the option for an open loop circuit cooling system. That was changed downstairs to become a requirement for a closed loop system or an alternative. The thought was just to, since there's a lot of water consumption and a lot of potential discharge, to take open loop off the table, basically, and require closed loops, because that would limit the water use, or as it says, an alternative that would also minimize water use as well. So I think that generally, as a blanket provision, before looking at all the permitting, would be something that would limit some of the water impacts. Moving along, I guess the other there are some littler changes, but the other big one is, if you recall, it is page 15, line 11. The bill did address a water quality certificate initially. That is usually required under the Clean Water Act, Section 401, for a project that has requires a federal permit, either under FERC or under Army Corps of Engineers 404 permit. It requires dam relicensings for hydro, for example. It requires extensive studies that are listed here in the bill. The thought was, in talking to DEC, it was a little confusing that we were requiring a water quality certificate or something similar to it when the trigger wasn't hit. So it was just sort of called a more extensive review based on the 150,000 gallons of water use. As Mike indicated, your average open loop facility will use 300,000 gallons, but closed loop, direct my research too, I couldn't find anything specific, but they use between 50 to 70% less water. So $300,000, 50%, or 300,000 gallons, 50% is about 150,000 gallons. So that would be the trigger that require a more extensive review of the water use, including the studies that are listed. And these are common studies for a water quality certificate: littoral review, impingement, wetlands, downstream flows, erosion, things of that nature that you get with a lot of water use. You have a lot more impacts. Those are the two main changes. There were some tweaks. We think those are great changes. And just ask that you support them, and I can turn it over to John to talk about the PFAS if there's no specific questions.
Okay.
Sorry if I went a little fast.
No, that's okay.
So on the PFAS section, that I just want to, they start, it's on page 16, starts really on line 11, and then goes on to page 17, lines 1 and 2, and then there's a report section which I can talk about. But sort of just as a reminder, so there's no dispute, all the research, there is PFAS coming from the discharge from data centers. And it's been an issue that's every state and municipality grappling with data centers is grappling with the PFAS and the discharge. So the House prohibited a data center from discharging PFAS and required that the data center work with A&R on a monitoring plan. After a lot of discussion about how to define PFAS, because there are literally over 10,000 PFAS compounds that exist, and EPA has a different regulatory definition for 5 or 6 different programs. And so Mike O'Grady made the recommendation, and we'd like to see the whole class, the whole tens of thousands, but Mike recommended we go with the A&R the EPA definition of PFAS. For the toxic regulatory program, about 40 or 50 PFAS. That definition is the same in the Senate bill, but the Senate changed the prohibition against discharge, as Mike discussed, to they got really twisted up, and there was testimony mostly from industry representatives in Vermont, not people who are from the data center industry per se, saying, well, the PFAS is really related to the cooling center, and if you just prohibit it, it could be unfair, because if they're drawing water for cooling,
either from groundwater or surface water, there might already be PFAS in it. So we shouldn't just prohibit the discharge of PFAS. We should measure how much PFAS is in that water being drawn, and then require a prohibition on any PFAS that's over that amount that's detected from the monitoring. So under the Senate plan in the bill, you're going to have two monitoring. You're going to monitor how much water is coming in, and then you're going to have to look at what is in the effluent or the discharge, see what the delta is or the difference between those two things, and that would be the prohibition. You know, my point of view on this is that it's really creating a really cumbersome system that I've never seen this done before. When we do have a standard for discharge, we just set a standard. We basically say how much of any pollutant is appropriate to be discharged into the waters, and then we set that standard, and then we treat to make sure that that standard is met. So we've created this kind of two-tiered approach. I'm glad that PFAS is still being addressed, but it seems like a very cumbersome way to do it. And if you look on page 17, one of the things that does concern me is that it basically says that the data center has to treat PFAS that from water that is used for the purposes of operating the coolant system. And there could be other PFAS in the effluent. Like when the water is coming out of these facilities, it's all mixed together, right? Like there's the coolant water, there's the water that's kind of running through the whole system that's going into the waste system for the data center. And so there could be water that's not part of the cooling system that has PFAS. Why would it have PFAS? Who knows? PFAS is used in industry so ubiquitously because it's a lubricant and it allows complex industrial facilities to operate. So there may be component parts that the data center has bought from someone else that has PFAS in it. And that PFAS could also be in the wastewater, not just the cooling water. I don't know how you would actually discern that. I don't know why you're testing really at that point. Like you're testing the effluent. I don't know how you could separate like the water for cooling versus wastewater that came from other aspects of the system. So I just think it's a quirky way to do it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I get the logic, I guess, that if there's X amount of PFAS coming in and X plus Y coming out, you should only be considering the Y. But what I don't understand how that works in the real world.
I'm not sure.
Because then the water coming out, do you only have to treat for the Y and you let the X go? I don't understand that.
So that's what you would do. And the thing that really I think kind of makes this a moot point is that the only effective treatment for PFAS is something called reverse osmosis. It's very effective and it basically gets you down close to zero.
Anyway. So whether you're treating for the delta or the total PFAS load,
you're going to be using this technology.
Anyway.
And the last thing I'll say, and then let's see, Representative Sibilia has a question, is that the reason why the debate we've had about using reverse osmosis more widely on our municipal wastewater treatment plants is because it's really expensive. So, states and municipalities all over the country, EPA have legitimately grappled with, like, wastewater treatment facilities are municipal run. They're paid by ratepayers. So who's paying that cost? That's why we have like the climate super fund bill. Like we're trying to figure out how to pay for all of these things. But in this case, data centers have more than enough resources. They're going to use this technology and it's going to treat it down. And again, like if it stays like this, I'm glad that PFAS is being treated. So it's not like the worst outcome that there could be. I just want to point out that it's an odd system, which we don't use in any other situation. And if and when the Agency of Natural Resources adopts a standard for PFAS, it won't work this way. They'll set a standard and you'll have to treat for it. And I will be a little critical. I know, Mike didn't want to be critical of A&R. It's been 7 years since the agency is supposed to have adopted a standard and they haven't done it. And if we had a standard, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. We would just be treating the water to that standard.
So you support section 3.
Yeah, I think that's the reality, I think, and that's and when the agency adopts a standard, then that should be the standard. There's also the report back in here is A&R is supposed to do a report on what the standard should be for data centers. I imagine that they'll kind of roll that in with, they're feeling more pressure, I think, because of the data center bill to come up with a standard. So I think I doubt that they'll just come up with what's the standard for data centers. They'll probably say, well, what's the standard? Period, right. So that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. So anyway, I'm happy to write this all down to your point of like.
That would be helpful.
Okay.
I truly, the oral only testimony is
it's complicated and
whisked away by the mists of tomorrow.
It's just a busy time of year
So-
and we're all running around, but
So it's helpful for creating a public record. It's helpful if you want
so I'll write this
your
down
comment
and
to be carefully considered.
for your consideration and
Yeah,
and
I
then
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Rep Sebelia?
So I apologize for having to leave briefly, but I may not have a question if what I believe I just heard is that while it's not exactly how you would like it, do support this section of the bill.
I like, excuse me, I like what I do with the house. The house language is much better and clearer, but
For PFAS.
So I could get into an intellectual exercise.
Yeah,
with
no,
you
I'm
at
glad it's being
some
addressed.
point
It's your call. It's a policy call.
but you're
If
okay with
PFAS, if PFAS wasn't addressed at all, I'd be sitting here saying we're not, absolutely not okay with it. I'm glad they're addressing PFAS.
Mhm.
So if this is how it ends up, I don't think it's ideal, but it would be better than we have for any other discharge with regard to PFAS in the state of Vermont. So,
Okay, thank you. I'm also.
And we are supportive of the rest of the water section as well. I can't recall when.
Thank you.
Yes.
but I'll write down that if you're going to go to conference committee, if you want to talk about it, it is an issue.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
see, I don't know what we're doing. Rep
Yeah.
Plattner?
Do you have any idea of the acquisition or operation cost of an RO system to remove PFAS from 150,000 gallons a day?
I don't know if that matter. We could all Google it, and I bet it's a lot. I bet it's expensive.
Yeah.
All right, great. Any further questions? Was there anybody else on the list? We did it. All right, thank you so much. Oh, Ben, are you supposed to testify? Hop on. Are you on the list?
Yes.
No, you're not. Hop on, let's go. Huh? I'm clearly looking at an old agenda, too, which is my fault.
Everything's
Yeah.
been surprised.
So Ben and Adam,
I'm just on the sideline.
okay,
Happy to. jump in.
sorry, guys, I'm looking at an outdated agenda.
Good afternoon.
Good noon.
Good noon. Good noon.
No.
No, it's afternoon.
I love that.
For the record, Ben Adgerley Walsh, with the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. Here yet again on H 727. And in particular, obviously on the potential Senate amendments, although they have not actually moved it yet. I am going to share my screen. I will be.
Senate Finance has not moved.
Senate Natural has moved it. Senate Finance has moved it. The Senate as a body has not yet moved it.
Great.
So this is obviously everyone assumes this is what you'll be seeing, but it had technically not happened yet. Good. Great. And I'll be quick with my slides because obviously we've already walked through all this language. I'll start by just saying broadly, VPIRG is very supportive of the bill that is moving its way through the Senate. We believe it has been made stronger in a number of ways. I couldn't share Mr. Groban's perspective as an organization, although I am not an expert on this on the PFAS section. But I will be focusing my comments today on the energy section in particular. So when this committee was working on this bill, I heard you use the concept a number of times that you're trying to fill gaps that we might have when it comes to the consideration of these facilities.
the way I see what the Senate did is they built on that gap filling and they added sort of a redundant safeguards approach or mentality. And I think if you had, a lot more time to hear about this, you might hear that X or Y provision in here isn't really necessary because we already have some other thing in statute and our perspective. And I think ultimately the Senate's perspective so far has been, given the stakes and given the resources of the companies that are constructing these things, having extra safeguards, belts and suspenders in place probably makes sense and certainly isn't going to cause Vermont any harm, but may prevent harm and maximize benefits. So 3 sort of buckets or categories in terms of how we're thinking about this. In terms of what the Senate did on energy provisions in this bill, strengthening and tightening ratepayer protections, expanding grid protection, both in terms of the framework in the bill and the tools that the bill really fleshes out, and then adding some specific provisions around reducing climate pollution. So I'm, of course, only going to be throwing out a few examples in each of these categories, but I'm trying to illustrate why we support the thrust of what this bill does, knowing you don't have time to go through provision by provision with every witness. So in the purpose section, the top of the bill, you see the House, obviously directionally very similar to the Senate, protecting ratepayers from unwarranted costs. And then the Senate shifts to financially benefiting existing ratepayers and protecting from additional costs. So speaking both to the benefits, maximizing the benefits and minimizing costs. In the contract provision, in A, which is sort of the purpose section of that provision specifically, you move from mitigating the risk of financial exposure to precluding the risk of financial exposure. Again, taking the direction of the House language and strengthening it, making it more absolute. And then similarly, moving from mitigate to ensuring that ratepayer classes are insulated from all costs in language in the actual contract provisions. When you shift to, at least in sort of how we're bucketing things out, grid protections, and I should say, obviously, the 3 buckets that I described are very interrelated, and you could shift things between buckets and it'd be very defensible, but this was helpful as I was thinking about it. So this is B7. Which is the demand side management provision that was put in the House. And obviously, as you heard, it has been modified a little bit, but then references and fully incorporates the requirements of Section 285, which, as you heard, was substantially expanded relative to the 1 paragraph that the House had, which we think is a great improvement in the bill because there's a lot that goes into effective demand side management. And while where the House landed certainly is directionally correct and would get some stuff done, I think there's a lot more certainty on what is actually going to happen due to the specificity in 285. So 2 provisions in 285 I wanted to flag in terms of the grid and the framework and tools around it. One is it significantly expands essentially the purpose or intent of the point of putting demand side management in the bill. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You already heard about it to some degree, but it really drives at the sort of comprehensive look at the grid, benefiting it on all the various ways, protecting it in all the various ways, and really speaking to specific concepts. Doesn't use the term headroom that I used here, but minimizing peak demand increases. So really digs into what are we trying to do here. And then one specific requirement, data centers must now participate in a virtual power plant, or if one is not available through the utility that's serving them, create a virtual power plant. And just very briefly, and I can refer you to testimony in the Senate from Jigar Shah, the former director of the loan program at Department of Energy, who really defined a virtual power plant and sort of expanded on that a little bit in verbal testimony. Essentially, we're talking about a whole bunch of different things that you can turn up and down using software, batteries, EV chargers, heat pumps, on down the line, basically anything that uses electricity, you can now connect in an integrated way using software to respond to the needs of the grid. And so rather than when the demand and supply aren't matching each other, or we're trying to reduce peak, the only options being fire up a generator and disconnect, or just turn down or turn off, right? That used to be the only two options. Now you can have on-site generation, on-site renewables, on-site storage. You can also aggregate all of these resources across a community or all of Vermont even, although there's reasons you'd want to keep it mostly in the local area, and reduce peak in other ways, and potentially benefit Vermonters in other ways by doing that. If you get a bunch of batteries that are partially paid for by a data center to shave their peak, those batteries are in basements during flooding events, right? Like, it's providing a resilience benefit in that example that is over and above what would happen without the virtual power plant. So it's doing more work than just reducing peak.
So, the last questions are going to change. Let's go through this. I guess I'm just wondering about Greg Faber's problems with this particular.
The virtual power plant?
Yes, this particular.
It
wasn't clear, and it sounded pretty clear to me what you're talking about.
It's certainly a lot clearer than the House version. I mean, you could obviously have put a specific percentage of total load from the data center that needs to be allocated to a virtual power plant or something like that. That I don't believe that explicit discussion happened in the Senate. I guess I would say our perspective is this bill, especially when you look at the purpose overall, and then 285A is very clear that, why we're doing this. And so the hypothetical that Mr. Faber put out of a couple of solar panels and you're done, I just don't think, I would hope very, very strongly and expect that the PUC would not approve a contract that attempted to skirt this requirement by doing something like that. And that the utility would also not see that as consistent with the bill you have before you, because it obviously would not achieve any of the goals or requirements laid out in here. So I do actually think it's very clear what it's driving at, even if there are not specific numerical standards in the bill.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, almost done. I wanted to flag just a few things in terms of climate pollution. Again, these things are also relevant to the grid and ratepayers, both in the design and construction process, and then in the operation and actual construction of the facility. They need to maximize on-site renewables. Both of those provisions are important from our perspective. If you're not designing the facility thinking about on-site solar, you could have a giant multi-acre warehouse that can only meet snow load and not have solar panels on top. There are a bunch of buildings like that in Vermont. That would be really dumb. And this prevents that sort of thing from happening. The requiring on-site combustion to only be true backup. This is to prevent the kind of things that we've seen in other states where there's an example of a couple of different facilities in Memphis, Tennessee, where XAI, Elon Musk's AI company, built a facility, brought in several dozen flatbed trucks with generators on the back, and that's how they powered the thing. They ultimately got sued under air quality standards and were made to change their operation, but then they did it again with the next site. So yes, we have other tools in the toolbox like air quality standards, but being abundantly clear in this statute, we think provides additional clarity and protections and would really preclude that sort of thing from being possible here. And that facility, it's bigger than anything anyone would expect in Vermont, but on that one site, it could create 10% of the total NOx pollution that everything in the state of Vermont emits at one location. So we're talking about really substantial localized pollution concerns. Again, maximizing on-site renewables, and then the energy transformation payment that you heard about earlier, which not just reduces carbon pollution, And that's really the primary carbon pollution provision in the bill. It, without running into any of the resource constraint issues that the Senate was hearing about from utilities. I know I'm running a little bit long, but just very briefly, we brought the 100% new renewables idea to them, just like we did to you. They considered it, but ultimately they heard from utilities that because of all of the things the Trump administration's been doing, tax credits going away, offshore wind being challenged at every turn, the build out of renewables in the region is going to be slower than expected. And so there was not confidence that new renewables would be available on the timeline that would be necessary with that kind of requirement. So this is essentially a Senate compromise to address carbon pollution without running into those resource constraint issues. And we think it's a smart way of doing that and would also bring other benefits. So that is my testimony. Again, we strongly support the bill that the Senate's considering, and we hope you will as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Questions for Ben? Okay, thanks everybody for staying late.
Yeah, I have a question for Ben.
Okay.
No, I don't.
I'm all set. So we. Okay. At this point, we are not back in committee this week. Stay tuned. I guess I'll let everybody know if that changes. We are on the floor tomorrow morning. Well, this afternoon, tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon. And I'm sure everybody saw the number for the speaker, right? We're on tomorrow afternoon on the floor. And then next week, floor moves to 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. every day. So we have a few folks who are wanting to testify about like advanced biomass in Vermont and things like that. And so keep an eye on the agenda, but we'll be meeting in a more ad hoc way if we need to do straw polls or something. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for staying late. We can go offline.